And I want to say welcome to our Northampton Community Television audience. This is Rick Haggerty kicking it for Peace, Culture, and Education, airing each Sunday morning on Valley Free Radio, 103.3 FM, and at 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. And my show replays Tuesday nights now at 11 p.m. And welcome back to our Valley Free Radio listeners. I've got Bruce Watson on the line, and he'll be talking about an article from his stellar online magazine, The Attic. Good morning, Bruce.
Good morning, Rick.
How are you this morning?
Doing pretty well.
All right, fantastic. So what have you got for us this morning?
Well, I believe I told your listeners last week I might read about the flags of Jasper John. Then as I was looking through the 60 or so articles in The Attic now, and one from the early days was... next year, they'll be celebrating the 50th anniversary of it, and I guarantee you will hear about it. So we're going to get a jump start on it. Just
Bruce, we had a little technical difficulties. This is about We Hold the Rock, correct?
We Hold the Rock. This is when the Native Americans took over Alcatraz.
My goodness. All right, go for it.
Okay, We Hold the Rock. A week before Thanksgiving in 1969, in the dark and damp of 4 a.m., several sailboats docked on Alcatraz Island in San Francisco Bay. Alcatraz's caretaker had been warned of the invasion. Now Glenn Dodson looked out his window to see shadowy forms approaching. He ran to his radio. "Mayday, Mayday," he called. "The Indians have landed." For the next 19 months, as the counterculture squared off against a silent majority, the occupiers of Alcatraz dug in. The group included Cherokee and Mohawk and Sioux and other native nations. They hoped to reclaim Alcatraz as Indian land. They failed, but their long-term goal, to alert a sleeping nation to the poverty and humiliation of their people, was a triumph. The siege of Alcatraz was an American uprising waged by first Americans, supported by other Americans, activists, celebrities, journalists, and politicians alike. Before it ended, the daring action caused a seismic shift in attitude. The era of cowboys and Indians and how the West was won became the age of bury my heart at Wounded Knee. The change began with a simple statement that greeted each native joining the siege. "Welcome to Alcatraz. You are now on Indian land." Little in the Dada Boyer's childhood prepared her to occupy federal turf. Instead, the Shoshone woman was accustomed to having her own nation occupied. But at 3 a.m. on November 20th, Boyer and her infant son had climbed aboard a small, crowded sailboat. She had classes that day at UC Berkeley where she was the first Native American student. She figured she'd miss them. Near Boyer and her sleeping son sat Richard Oakes. A student at San Francisco State, Oakes made no claim to leadership, but reporters, calling the tall Mohawk a young Victor Mature, gravitated to him. With Oakes was his 12-year-old stepdaughter, Yvonne. Within a month, Yvonne would fall to her death on Alcatraz, sending Oakes home to mourn. But he would return to the island and lead other native occupations throughout the West. For decades, Alcatraz had been America's most notorious prison, home to Al Capone, Machine Gun Kelly, and its famous Birdman. The last prisoners were removed in 1963, leaving buildings and cell blocks to molder. Native occupiers came to loathe the grim place, but still they stayed. Now, they told the world, the first sight seen by ships entering the Golden Gate was Indian land. The Nixon White House made plans to storm the island, then thought better, fearing an international incident. So Coast Guard cutters swarmed the waters, chasing speedboats bringing still more natives. Helicopters buzzed overhead. Reporters came spreading the news, drawing native peoples from as far as South America. Alcatraz, one told the Los Angeles Times, has united Indians for a second time. The first time was against Custer. A California congressman proposed giving Alcatraz to the natives. The state assembly backed the idea, but Governor Ronald Reagan did not. Marlon Brando came to the island, so did Anthony Quinn and Candace Bergen. Occupiers began daily radio-free Alcatraz broadcasts, proclaiming, "We hold the rock." Richard Oakes offered to buy the island for $24 in beads. With the federal government hamstrung, the siege dragged on through a native Thanksgiving, turkeys provided by San Francisco restaurants, and on past Christmas. Holed up in the echoing prison, Lenata Boyer set up a Big Rock School to teach native arts and lore. Children ran through the fog playing Indians and federal guys. Graffiti proclaimed, "This land is my land," and "We, the Indians, discovered America." Boats ran the Coast Guard blockade, landing food and clothing. The uprising captured the spirit of a radical age. Anthropologist Margaret Mead praised the siege as a magnificent piece of dramatization. TV host Merv Griffin did a show from the Rock. Newspaper cartoons depicted natives in tribal dress heading for powwows on Alcatraz. But as the siege continued into 1970, tensions flared. Natives had to fend off hippies pitching tents, ministers come to preach the gospel to the heathens, and others offering drugs or sex. Living in cement catacombs, many natives felt watched by ghosts. Factional fighting pit young radicals against elders. In March, Nixon officials came to negotiate. Natives rejected their offer to turn Alcatraz into a national park with a, quote, maximum Indian quality. Instead, they demanded the deed to the Rock and $300,000 for their own university on the island. Nixon's Secretary of the Interior considered the proposal, but hardliners, including future Watergate figures, prevailed. In late May 1970, the government cut off all electricity. Supporters said gas-powered generators and water in kegs and barrels. The siege continued. On June 1st, 1970, fire gutted the oldest lighthouse on the West Coast. The government blamed the occupiers, who blamed government saboteurs. Throughout a frigid summer, natives huddled around campfires, talking strategy, while the lights of San Francisco glimmered in the distance. Meanwhile, inspired by Alcatraz, natives occupied a federal fort in Seattle, swarmed aboard the Mayflower II in Plymouth, and sailed toward Ellis Island. Despite White House caution against, quote, a unified attack on the Indians, federal marshals repelled each occupation. President Nixon, struggling to quell the rising militancy, proposed 22 changes in federal policy. It is long past time that Indian policies of the federal government began to recognize and build upon the capacities of the Indian people, Nixon announced. Yes, Nixon. Most of the changes were adopted, increasing Indian autonomy. Back on Alcatraz, natives restored the lighthouse, but its faulty beacon raised fear of shipwreck. On August 11th, an arrow struck a cruise ship taking tourists past the island. Then two tankers collided in the darkness near Golden Gate Bridge. By the spring of 1871, Richard Oakes, Lenata Boyer, and other occupiers were leading protests across America. Only the most militant remained on Alcatraz. Finally, on June 11th, the Coast Guard invaded the island to remove 6 men, 4 women, and 5 children. The siege was over, but its spirit lived on in the nascent American Indian movement. We came to Alcatraz with an idea, said a statement by Indians of all tribes. We would unite our people and show the world that the Indian spirit would live forever. The idea was born and spread across this land, not as a fire of anger, but as a warming glow.
All right. Bruce Watson with his article from the attic, We Hold the Rock. What a great story. I had no idea that took place.
It's been largely forgotten. I came across it just looking through stuff on the 60s, and I haven't seen too much about it. Most of the principles passed on. There was a wonderful Native American poet named John Trudell who did Radio Free Alcatraz just passed a couple of years ago, and there might be a couple others still around, but it's been almost 50 years now. But it really did change an awful lot. And probably of all the protests in the 60s, other than civil rights, it might be the most consequential.
Absolutely. And I mean, talk about Occupy Wall Street. I mean, this is like the original Occupy in modern times, Occupy. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's pretty incredible, that Nixon, as you said, of all people, would be, obviously, I mean, trying to, put down, political controversy, but also negotiating really and, trying to help the situation. What did you think of that? Were you surprised in your research coming across Nixon's, Well,
the more you read about Nixon, you don't like the guy, but he was a politician. And I remember years and years ago, I'll tell a little story here. In 1972, I was on college campus, and people were starting to lose confidence in McGovern because he was a politician. And David Harris, who was one of my idols and a great draft resistor, husband of Joan Baez, spoke to my school, and he said, if you have a choice, he's talking about Nixon McGovern. He said, look, I won't lie to you about McGovern, he's a politician, but when you have a choice between a politician and a psychotic, you go with the politician. Fast forward about 50 years, and you look at Nixon and you say, well, we got a choice between a politician and a psychotic. We'll go with the politician. We sort of missed Nixon a little bit. He had obviously this, all of Watergate. Vietnam was even worse, but he was a politician. And he was a politician, and he knew how to appease certain groups. He set up the EPA after all, and some of the other things. So that doesn't forgive him for Watergate or Vietnam. Yeah. But he did know how to do certain things in ways that we sort of miss.
Yeah, I think the China, détente or whatever, just reestablishing, ties with China. And in this article, I mean, it's, you mention it and the grieving, but Yvonne, the 12-year-old, falling to her death, it sounds like at the beginning of this occupation, what a tragedy, that, there'd be so much unity and so much breakthrough, but, a personal loss like that, just...
Yeah, it's really, there's a huge contrast here and a little stark as a story. It's a little bit, it's a happy ending for the overall uprising of the movement, but the group that was taken off the island finally, it was a pretty miserable place to occupy, and to do it for 19 months is itself a victory. But there was tremendous suffering out there.
Yeah, I'm looking at the picture on the attic.space on your online magazine website, and it looks pretty grim. What are those like cells over the group of
those are
Cherokee?
Cells over there. There's a bunch of natives posing as a group, sort of group portrait, and in the cell blocks. And this place hadn't been really kept up. I was surprised to read there was somebody out there keeping it up, because if at least to live in San Francisco, it's not an easy place to get to. Even if you have a boat, you're out in the middle. I mean, you couldn't be farther out in the middle of the bay. It's dead center, and the weather, of course, in the Bay Area, and so it's a rough place.
Yeah.
Now, of course, it's a tourist attraction, but
right.
But at any rate, we hadn't done anything with it for years.
Yeah, fantastic. So I want to remind folks that they're listening to Valley Free Radio, WXOJ 103.3 FM Northampton, streaming online at valleyfreeradio.org. And also we have on board our Northampton Community Television audience, and that you can catch that on your local cable channel as well. So back to the article. This had sounds like it had a unifying, as was stated in the end, a very unifying effect, and it sounds as though it was embraced nationwide. From what it sounds like, could you talk about that? How the nation responded to this protest?
Well, I think that it was surprising. I was surprised by the support to read that somebody as mainstream white bread as Merv Griffin. Folks remember him as a band singer, and then he actually did a bunch of other stuff in show business. But he had a nightly talk show, and for him to go out there and do a show, you'd think Dick Cavett might have done it, but
that's pretty big.
But Merv Griffin and then some of the celebrities, of course, and probably if there'd been Jerry Brown had been the governor in California, as he will be for a few more months, and was right after Reagan back in the 70s, maybe it would have been different. But of course, Reagan was not going to back that, and so he was even more conservative as California governor than he was as president. And don't get me started on that. and anyway, but it was surprising the breadth of the support, and really the culture terms. I grew up in playing cowboys and Indians and using the phrase Indian giver and all these horrible things. And of course, I'm dating myself now, but really by 1970 onward, also movies like Little Big Man came out. Other movies, what was that movie? Soldier Blue. Several other movies that were totally supportive of Cheyenne Autumn, of the Native American side. We had never seen that prior to 1970. Never in any that I know of in any movie. And sometimes there'd be individual characters in even in John Wayne movie that might be sympathetic, but an overall Western story told from the Native point of view, never that I know of.
Sure.
And by the 70s, it was fairly common, and sympathy had turned full circle, really.
Yeah. Yeah. Outstanding. So again, coming up on the 50th anniversary of which would be next year at Thanksgiving.
Next year.
Yeah, Thanksgiving of 1969. We Hold the Rock. And Bruce Watson here with us. And I encourage you to go to theattic.space, his online news magazine, and you can subscribe there for free. I really recommend it if you are into reading interesting articles about America. And yeah, and so anything else you want to say about your website? Because I'm sure enjoying it. I enjoyed that Steve Harrell article, Steve's Ice Cream Harrell's.
Yes, this week's featured article, new one, is on Steve Harrell, our own Northampton institution, and how he changed ice cream, going back to the original Steve's in Somerville. And then there are articles I sort of have to rush in and say on women's history, a number of them on humor, on American history in general, and on American originals. I have some lists there, American lists. There's a new list this week of 10 using names for restaurants. So I'm just trying to have what I create a kinder, cooler America, or at least a place people can go to find that. And that's my goal.
All right. Fantastic. Well, we sure appreciate it, Bruce. And I absolutely appreciate having you on my show. And I know my listeners are benefiting greatly. So we'll talk to you next week. And thanks so much for calling in.
Okay, no problem. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, enjoy the holiday.
Have a good day. Yep.
All right, sure thing. You too. All right. So, so Bruce Watson, and what a great website. And again, that's theattic.space. And again, thank you to our Northampton Community Television audience, and thank you to Al Williams, Jen, and Dave, and everybody there who makes placing Valley Free Radio shows on NCTV possible. So thanks so much, folks.